Do another quick brainstorm. We're talking about the laws that domestic workers have been excluded from. So if folks could write in the chat, and folks on the phone, you could blurt it out if you know, what are some basic rights that most workers have under federal law in the US? So just all workers across all industries, what are basic rights that most workers have? Okay, someone said minimum wage.
Overtime for
Right to overtime.
Yeah, overtime.
rest and meal break.
Paid sick leave.
Someone said pay sick days. Then someone said rest and meal breaks. Any other ideas?
For the 24-hour caregiver in a one-on-one setting, as per SB 1015, I think the sleep, I don't know if this will correct me, guys, if, the 8 hours sleep uninterrupted.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other ideas? So some of what we shared are actually laws that have been won in other ways, or like rights that have been won in other ways. What actually is included and protected under federal law is a national minimum wage, 40-hour work week, right to organize a union, right to strike, picket, or boycott, workplace free of harassment, and workplace free of health and safety hazards, and then child labor. So a lot of the things that are talking about, like, paid sick days and having fair contracts and meal and rest breaks actually aren't covered right now, right? But wouldn't it be great if it was? And that's a little bit of, why we're at this point. So while these laws apply to most workers, domestic workers were actually originally excluded from almost all of these rights, right? And we can continue to find that domestic workers are excluded from a lot of them. And so we talk about, this moment of domestic workers being excluded from labor rights as an intentional thing that happened, early in the 1900s. And it's something that happens, and it's directly tied to the legacy of slavery in the United States, because domestic workers and farm laborers who were, oftentimes formerly enslaved folks were the ones who were being, intentionally excluded from labor laws. So we know that is something that has happened, and that's why it's taken so long to reverse that course. So what we know now is that domestic workers are finally included in protections for minimum wage, right? And that's something that they were originally excluded from. Somebody mentioned live-in care workers. So originally all domestic workers were excluded from the 40-hour work week and overtime pay. And now most domestic workers are included in that, but live-in workers are still excluded from that protection. We know that domestic workers still don't have a right to organize a union, to aren't protected to strike, picket, boycott, aren't included in protections against harassment and discrimination and work and safety hazards. But we are protected from child labor. So there's still a really long way to go, and we're going to get into a lot of that in the next couple of hours. Before we move on, you guys can put this in the chat or say out loud, is anyone surprised to hear what federal laws domestic workers are excluded from? or included from? Is there anything that we've shared that's surprising or new to anyone?
When I first heard that, not now, I was surprised of the oppressive slavery mentality behavior of America. But, and it's really still, it angers me even, as you mentioned now. But I just want to make sure, you said these things that we mentioned, like the meal and rest period, rest break, these were not the federal, included in the federal law?
Correct.
Just the state law? Okay.
Yeah, under current federal law. Yeah.
Okay.
That is not a right.
So in California, it is a law.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and so that's a really great point to raise up, that beyond federal laws, states and municipalities might have additional protections, right? So in places like California, you might have some pretty progressive additional protections for workers. Whereas in states like Georgia, where I live, that's not so much the case. So yeah, thanks for raising that. And so, yeah, next we're going to go a little bit more into that history, and we're going to learn about